Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Incredible stories of love and struggle in the Wild West come to life here. Fates tempered by the winds of the prairies and feelings stronger than time itself await you. Please like it if you like atmospheric stories. And get ready. Something unforgettable awaits you. In southern Arizona, where the sun does not forgive weakness, dust falls on the face like a shroud. Where tumbleweeds roll past crooked crosses and even crows don't caw unnecessarily, there was a narrow road leading to that very edge, vicious, dead, and nameless. It stretched between rocks, past dried streams and dying cacti, as if fate itself was leading a silent march along it. A woman was walking along that road, bound with rusty chains. Her step was unsteady, but not out of fear. She had been afraid for a long time. If her soul lived, it was in some other place where the shackles couldn't reach. Her dress hung in tatters, as dusty as her hair. There were no tears or makeup on her face. Only dust, blood, and quiet doom clenched by the jaw. 4 men were walking nearby. One is on horseback, the others are on foot, but with guns at the ready. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't need words. They weren't being paid to talk. Their job was simple, to take her to the cliff where the criminals once hung. Now, those who prevent rich people from sleeping soundly are being hanged. No one looked into her eyes, and she wasn't looking for looks. She was taken to a place where there was no one, where there was no chance. We climbed to a plateau, a silent, desiccated place, as if the earth itself had abandoned it. There was once a fort there, but it was dismantled into splinters. All that remained was a hook and a pole embedded in the stone with a rope charred by the sun. They stopped. One of them took off his hat, rubbed his forehead and looked around, as if asking the sky for permission. But the sky did not respond. It was as ruthless as ever. They put her on her knees, and no one said a word. His hands weren't shaking behind his back. Even when the hinge creaked, she didn't look away. She looked into the distance, where a dusty road wound between the rocks, disappearing into the hot haze. And at that very second, something changed. It wasn't a sound, it wasn't a shadow, more like a feeling. It was as if the landscape had tensed up like a horse before a race. One of the men froze for a moment and then stepped sideways, as if sensing danger nearby. The bullet hit him in the forehead. Not a shot, but a blow, dry as a whip. The others didn't even have time to swear. The second bullet took off the arm of the second, and the third collapsed, screaming. But the sound of his scream was lost in the roar of another shot. There was only one left, a horse. He tried to turn his horse around, but he didn't have time. He was pulled down, a rope wrapped around his neck. He screamed, and then silence. The girl was still on her knees. She wasn't looking. She was waiting for the end to come, but instead there was silence, not the one before death, and the one in which someone alive looks into your eyes. He came out from behind the cliff, tall, tanned, wearing a faded raincoat and carrying a rifle, which he held as an extension of his arm. His face was in shadow, and his eyes were in the depths. There was no surprise, no joy, only dumbness, deaf, as if he was talking only to himself. He walked over to her, cut the rope. He took off his shackles. She did not fall, did not thank, did not recoil. I just sat there, and he was standing. Light began to break through the darkness in her head, slowly like the first rays on the edge of dawn. Was it really not the end? But who is he? He didn't say a word. He just turned around and walked away. She looked after him. His step was confident, like someone who had gone through everything a long time ago and returned. She stood up. No questions asked, no shouting. I just followed him, and the wind lifted the dust and carried her name towards the horizon. And somewhere in that dust, among the blood, the dead, and the ashes, something was born. It's not fate yet. It's not love yet. But it's not empty anymore. She wasn't thinking. She was walking. At first, hesitantly, as if my feet couldn't believe the ground. Then more evenly. It was as if someone inside said, Go!" And she went. I followed him along the scorching path, where the stones burned through the soles of my boots, even through the thick leather. The sun was rising higher, but he didn't slow down, didn't turn around. His step was confident, like that of a man who has no doubts. Not about himself, not in the direction, not that he will be followed. I didn't know who he was, where he came from, why he saved me, if it was salvation. On the plateau, where the smell of blood still lingered, I could stay, lie down between the bodies and let the desert take its toll. But I got up. I went. Not because I believed him, because it couldn't be any worse than it was. He didn't say anything. I didn't even look at it. As if he knew I was going. As if it had already happened. Once, somewhere. It was as if he had walked this path before, only with someone else. Or alone. With every step I took, I wondered if he'd just pulled me out of some chains to throw his own on. She followed him, sliding over rocks and dry grass that crunched underfoot. His gait was precise and quiet, as if he could hear the whisper of the wind and the mysteries of the rocks he was leading her through. Not a single unnecessary movement, not a word, just a confident, steady step, as if every turn of the route was engraved in memory. A desolate landscape stretched around, dry hummocks, broken rocks, and a blue sky without a single cloud. But there was power in his silence, a silence that spoke more than any words. She tried to catch the slightest movements, shadows, and sounds that he noticed and adjusted to. Every time he slowed down or listened, her heart clenched in anticipation. There were no questions, no answers, just this wordless dialogue between two strangers bound by fate. Doubts filled her mind. Wasn't this the captivity of a new, invisible species, or a salvation that is only taking shape now? She walked on, not knowing where this path would lead, but no longer wanting to stop. As the sun sank below the horizon, they found shelter among the majestic rocks, hidden so carefully that it was barely noticeable. Here, in the shadow of the rocks, the air became cooler and the silence became thicker. He silently lit a small fire, the flame of which barely flickered, as if afraid to disturb the peace of this place. Without turning around, he tossed her a blanket, simple, rough, but warming, and turned away again. She could barely stand on her feet. Fatigue squeezed her muscles, but sleep refused to come. Fear and a strange, barely perceptible trust were mixed in her chest, as if an invisible thread connected her to this silent man. There was silence all around, broken only by the crackle of wood in the fire and the whisper of the night wind. At that moment, everything seemed to be no coincidence, as if fate itself had brought them together here, under the stars, to begin a new chapter. In the silence of the night, as the flames of the campfire cast dancing shadows on the stones, her mind was flooded with memories. The hands, cold and strong, that had bound her that terrible night. A judgment hall, without words or pity, whose gazes were like sharp knives, mercilessly piercing the soul. The look of the one who pronounced the sentence seemed to have been inked into her memory, becoming an invisible mark that could not be erased. In this silence, where there was not a single sound, she heard her name, barely audible, almost a whisper, which could not be uttered by anyone other than fate itself. Although he didn't say her name, she felt something deep and unfathomable in his silent presence. He was not a hunter who came to take prey, but also not the savior who appeared with a white banner. He was an enigma, a shadow between light and dark, whose role in her life had yet to be revealed. Under the cold light of dawn, she woke up, feeling the emptiness next to her. He was not there. The fire burned down to the last embers, leaving only a barely noticeable warmth in the air. The footprints he had left yesterday were disappearing into the dark night, as if dissolving into silence. Panic slowly gripped her chest. Had he left her here, abandoned her for his own freedom, or was it part of a test, a challenge, a test that she must pass to prove her strength? My thoughts were spinning in a whirlwind, but my feet were already gathering things, everything that could be carried, however small. She stepped out into the cool morning, her eyes peering in the direction where the footprints went. My heart was beating like a drum, but my fear couldn't outweigh my determination. Not getting lost was the first priority. The footprints are the only thread leading further into the unknown, into his world. When fatigue almost made her break down and the path seemed like an endless maze, he suddenly appeared again. Without a word, like a ghost emerging from the desert, he handed her a flask of water and a small piece of bread. His eyes remained hidden in shadow, and his face was as still as a stone. She eagerly took the water, waiting for at least one hint, a glance, a gesture, some explanation for this strange journey. But he didn't answer. He just turned around and quietly disappeared into space, leaving behind a slight smell of tobacco and dust. A struggle broke out in her chest between the desire to speak out and the fear of breaking the fragile rhythm of silence that held them together. Her voice longed to break through, but her lips tightened tightly. The fear of losing that mute connection with a man without a past was stronger. Evening descended on the desert, shrouding everything in a soft twilight. He was sitting by the campfire, a sharp knife in his hands, sharpening the blade with amazing concentration. Every movement was measured like a ritual to shut out the outside world. She positioned herself at some distance, trying to warm herself by the faint warmth of the fire, and at the same time watched him without taking her eyes off him. There was one question that kept nagging at her. Had he really saved her? Or had he just ripped them out of some chains to put on others that were more invisible but no less heavy? The silence between them was thick, ringing, like a taut string, ready to snap at any moment. But despite all her doubts and fears, she couldn't and wouldn't leave. Something in that silence held her, clung to her, and wouldn't let go. Under the scorching desert sun, they raced like two shadows, merging with the dusty wind that tore the red-hot grains of sand into their faces. Rocks and crevices flashed around as if the earth itself was trying to prevent their escape. Every step reverberated through her body like a hammer blow, but she held on with the last of her strength, relying on his silent support. He ran beside me, not making a sound, focused, as if every muscle was stretched to the limit. His face was riddled with scars, old wounds that not only spoke of previous battles, but also hid deeper hidden pain and guilt. His eyes reflected the heaviness of the past that he couldn't or wouldn't let go of. Dust billowed underfoot, mixing with heat and adrenaline. She understood that every minute of freedom was a gift, but who were they to each other now? The savior and the saved, or prisoners of a common shadow hanging over their destinies? His eyes, deep and dark as the night sky, held an unspoken guilt. She tried to read these silent thoughts as if opening a book, the pages of which are covered with the dust of oblivion and the scars of the past. His every silence was like a heavy stone that he couldn't shake off his shoulders. She wondered why he was the one who saved her, tore her from her chains, and didn't leave her to her fate. What binds them now, besides the dust and danger that follows them on their heels? Deep down, I had a hunch that their stories were much more intertwined than they seemed at first glance. The silence between them became more palpable than the hot air, heavier than the thick dust that flew behind their feet. This silence spoke more than any words. It hid fear, hope, and perhaps the beginning of a trust that had not yet dared to break through. Suddenly, on the horizon, among the sun, scorched rocks and barren dust, a silhouette of a human tracker appeared, accustomed to reading this land like an open book. His step was light and confident, his gaze sharp, as if he was used to noticing everything from the movement of a snake to the smallest footprints in the sand. His eyes quickly swept over the figures of the fugitives, and instantly recognition flashed in them. The girl is the one for whom the reward has been announced for a long time. His face betrayed neither joy nor anger, only wariness and cold determination. He knew that this crossing of paths would change a lot. She felt her heart constrict with surprise and anxiety. Meeting him was like a sharp gust of wind on a hot day, unpleasant, unpredictable, but inevitable. The savior next to him was silent, watching, as if studying the situation through the prism of his hidden intentions. The silence between them became even thicker, mixing with the buzzing of insects and the occasional sighing of the wind. At that moment, she realized that her past would not let her go, and the path to freedom would be much more difficult than it seemed. With each step in their journey together, the question that lurked in the shadow of their tacit alliance became stronger. Was she really a doomed victim whose voice was muffled by chains and fear, or a criminal whose secrets were hidden deeper than footprints in the dust? The path of her past was obscured by a haze of understatement, and even in the eyes of those who sought a reward, her image remained contradictory. His own story was no less mysterious. The silent savior whose shadow slid behind her carried the weight of unspoken words and lost years. Was he a defender who was willing to sacrifice everything for her, or a stalker whose motives were hidden in the dark? Their fates were intertwined so tightly that sometimes it was difficult to understand where the trust begins and where the trap begins. Their bond had become a thin thread stretched to the limit. There was tension between them, like an invisible crack that could only be seen in the silence, and glances filled with fear and hope. The mystery of their relationship only grew, attracting and repelling at the same time, creating an atmosphere in which every step was a test. Hiding in an abandoned mining camp, she allowed herself to relax for the first time. There was an oppressive silence around, a rare visitor in this region, where the clink of tools and the footsteps of workers used to sound. The dim moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting shadows on the floor like the ghosts of days long gone. A strange kaleidoscope began to pop up in her head. Faces, smells, sensations. Her name, Cassidy, sounded deep somewhere, like an echo of another life she barely remembered. At times, the picture became clearer. The town where she lived, the faces of the people who were dear to her, and those who betrayed her. All these fragments, like specks of dust, merged into a single whole, but remained vague and shaky. She touched her temple with her palm, trying to hold on to these memories, but the more she clung to them, the faster they slipped away. It felt like someone was trying to erase her past, but it resisted, clinging to her consciousness. And with every passing moment, the understanding grew stronger in this consciousness. Her life was being hunted for a reason, but because she was hiding something important. It was here, among the empty buildings and broken walls, that an old fear and a new hope began to awaken in her soul at the same time. The fear of someone who might come after her, and the hope that she was not alone. In the depths of her mind, where memories were just beginning to break through the veil of oblivion, Cassidy gradually realized the severity of her fate. Her name wasn't just a whisper of wind in the desert. It sounded like a warning, like a name followed by a long trail of enemies and unanswered questions. Enemies whose faces were blurred shadows, but their thirst for revenge was a tangible reality. The secrets she kept were like hidden treasures, dangerous and forbidden. They concerned not only herself, but also many people she had once known. Each truth, pushed out of memory, was like a drop of water, ready to burst out of the bowl and flood everything around. In this realization, anxiety awoke, not just the fear of death, but the fear for those who were left behind, for the destinies that she could destroy if she allowed the secrets to come out. These reasons, like chains, bound her past, explaining why they wanted her dead, not for revenge, but for the sake of hiding the terrible truth. In this forgotten camp, among the abandoned buildings, she realized that her escape was not just an attempt to save her life. This is a struggle for the truth, for the future, which she could still change. But to move on, it was necessary to understand and accept what was hidden in the shadow of her memory. He had been walking on wild trails for so long that he had almost forgotten who he was and where he came from. His past was like a shadow lost in the desert wind, dark, empty, and nameless. He is a rootless and homeless vagabond, a wanderer who has no memory or promises. His face was scarred by time and wind, and his eyes held the depth of silence and heavy secrets. He didn't speak. There was a whole story in his silence that no one knew or should have known. He seemed like a ghost of the past, crossing this land without a trace. But when his gaze met hers, eyes full of pain and hope, something stirred in him. In the depths of this lonely wanderer, a spark of humanity sparkled, which he had long since buried. Something warm and alive, like the dawn, crept through the darkness of his soul. He did not immediately understand what exactly caused this fire inside, but in the presence of Cassidy, he began to think about his own fate, about what it means to be not just a tramp, but a man with a past and a future. Her story was not just a salvation for him. It was the beginning of something new, perhaps even redemption. And as the night enveloped the abandoned camp, for the first time in a long time, he felt not alone. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of himself, vulnerable and strong at the same time, and it made him stop, think, and, perhaps for the first time, believe in the future. They ran until their legs ached and their breathing became heavy and uneven. The wind, which brought the smell of dust and scorching stones, mixed with the silence, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. He was silent, and she tried to keep up, feeling weakness gradually invade every muscle. Finally, among the barren hills and sun-baked rocks, a shelter appeared in front of them, an abandoned mining camp like a forgotten world buried under the dust of time. Dilapidated barracks stood in silent sadness. Rusting tools hung from the sagging walls, and wooden floorboards creaked in the light wind, like the echoes of long-gone voices. It was a place where the past merged with the present, where forgotten stories left their scars in every cracked log and sagging roof. Here, among the shadows and dust, they found a temporary shelter, a secluded corner where they could hide from pursuers and worries. He took the rifle off his shoulder and glanced around, as if trying to read something important out of this dead silence. Then he threw her something warm, a blanket, as if a silent sign that here, in this abandoned world, she could find at least a little protection. She wrapped herself in a cloth and sat down by the stub of an old campfire, which was barely smouldering in the coals. Fatigue hit her with renewed force, but sleep would not come. Instead, thoughts wove threads of fear and hope, doubt and trust, and in this mixture a strange connection was born. Not words, but silence, not promises, but deeds. In this abandoned place, where the shadows of the past stretched towards the present, a new chapter of their story was being born. Quiet, tense, but already filled with subtle hope for a future that had yet to be discovered. She lay next to the campfire, barely hearing the crackle of logs. The wind whispered through the ruins, as if reminding of a bygone time, of those who had left and would not return. His silence, so long and dense, seemed like an impenetrable curtain that hid the whole world. And suddenly, in the midst of this deep silence, he uttered one word. It was short, almost emotionless. Sleep. But there was not only command in that simple sound, but also careful concern, as if for the first time he allowed himself to express at least something human. This word lay on her heart like a quiet promise that now the danger would go away for a while and she could try to find peace. Her gaze met a dark figure by the fire, and in that moment something changed. He wasn't just a silent wanderer, he became someone who watches over, who protects. But sleep did not come, and the words remained the last bridge between their worlds. She wrapped herself in a blanket, but sleep was in no hurry to come. My heart was racing, and my mind was racing between the past and the present, as if trying to make sense of what had already been forgotten and what lay ahead. For the first time in many nights, she felt warm, not only from the fire, but also from a sense of security, a strange and almost alien feeling. She knew that there was someone next to her who would not harm, who would protect her, at least for this night. Her mind wandered through the shadows of memories, the hands that held her down and the looks full of condemnation. But now there was another person, and the silence between them made no room for fear. Despite the inability to sleep, hope was rising inside, fragile as morning dew on a dry earth, but real. That night, something subtle and invisible arose between them, but felt by the whole body, an unspoken trust, warmth that warmed their souls like a quiet fire. Without words, without touching, without promises, just the presence of another person who was not an enemy and did not carry a threat. It was the beginning of a new bond, fragile as a spider's web, but able to withstand the winds and storms of their destinies. She felt fear fade into the background, giving way to what could only be called intimacy. It wasn't love, not right away, but rather the first glimmer of hope, a light in the dark that penetrated through the silence into the heart and spoke softly. "You're not alone." In this silence, they found each other, without words, without explanations, just breathing next to each other and the feeling that the world had become a little less cruel for a moment. In the dim light of the flickering campfire, his silhouette seemed even more severe, but his voice, on the contrary, acquired an unexpected softness. He spoke slowly, as if pulling the words out of the depths of his memory, making his way through the bitterness and pain that he had carried with him for many years. He talked about the war for gold, a cruel and senseless one that claimed his wife and son, leaving only emptiness and scars on his heart. These memories were not a consolation story, but rather a confession, which he rarely shared even with himself. His voice sounded heavy, with a hint of fatigue and bitterness, as if he himself was struggling with the shadow of the past, trying to survive in the present. There was loss and guilt in every word, as if he hadn't been able to protect those he loved. It was a revelation for her. For the first time, he allowed her to look behind the mask of a silent wanderer and see a man with wounds that time does not heal. In the silence of the night, under the starry sky, an understanding arose between them. Each of them has his own demons, and only together they can find the strength to move on. She sat next to him, peering into the dark silhouette by the campfire, and for the first time her gaze lingered not on the silence, but on what lay behind it, on the gravity of his past and the depth of his pain. His wounds were invisible but palpable, like scars inflicted not on his body, but on his soul. It was more than just silence. It was a silence filled with a story that he hadn't wanted or couldn't tell before. Her own fears and doubts were receding, giving way to a new feeling, a connection that didn't require words or explanations. In this silence, in this joint silence, they found a common point of support. She saw in him not just a wanderer who had snatched her from captivity, but a man who, despite everything, continued to fight his own demons. This understanding, quiet and deep, began to intertwine their destinies, like an invisible thread connecting two lost people. At that moment, a shaky but real connection arose between them, one that was born not from words, but from what they had experienced together and accepted each other. They walked through deserted streets where every step echoed in the musty air of the abandoned city. The houses, covered with a layer of dust and cobwebs, seemed to have trapped time. The windows were broken. The doors creaked in the wind, which seemed to be the last witness to the once turbulent life. There were no sounds, no movements, only an oppressive silence, as if the city itself breathed the musty breath of oblivion. She looked around, trying to squeeze some hope out of this dead landscape. In her eyes, there is not just fatigue, but a desperate desire to find at least a crumb of food, water, at least something that will allow them to last another day. He walked beside her, silently examining the ruins, not letting himself relax for a moment. In this lifeless void, even a slight noise could mean danger, and they both knew it. The wind picked up dust and scraps of paper that had once been part of other people's stories, but now turned into forgotten pages. They moved forward, guided not so much by the map as by their survival instinct. Here, in the midst of silence and oblivion, the past did not let go, and the future seemed vague, like a mist creeping over the horizon. From behind the shadow of the destroyed building, a figure suddenly appeared. A woman with a gun, restrained and wary, as if she was used to being on the lookout in this forgotten place. Her eyes instantly recognized her as Cassidy. The moment hung in the air like a taut string, filling the space with tension that was impossible not to feel. The woman stood like a guardian of ancient secrets, guarding something more than just an abandoned city. She took her time with her movements, but her gaze was sharp and penetrating, as if scanning every shadow, every breath of air. There was a sense of history in her appearance, long years of survival, betrayal, and struggle that couldn't fit into one glance. Cassidy felt the flames of old connections and abandoned promises flare up inside her. The appearance of this woman was a sign that the past would not let her go so easily. With the tension came questions that could no longer be ignored. What is this city hiding? What connects them all? In the shadows of the dilapidated houses, while a woman with a gun held her at gunpoint, fragments from long-forgotten days surfaced in Cassidy's memory. She was the daughter of a wealthy and influential rancher whose lands stretched far beyond the horizon. Those years were filled with luxury and hope, but everything collapsed in one terrible moment, a brutal massacre that left behind only ashes and pain. Having survived, as if by a miracle, she now carried with her the burden of loss and the secret that they tried to destroy along with her family. Her name was on the lips of many, but the truth about who she really was remained hidden behind a veil of fear and betrayal. Every step she took in this dead city was an echo of the past, a reminder of the duty she had to fulfill. This city, which had once flourished, now lay in ruins, a symbol of shattered hopes and an endless struggle for survival. The secrets that were kept here could change everything, if only Cassidy would let them come to light. The look of the woman with the gun left no doubt. The past was closer than ever. In the depths of Cassidy's mind, the true meaning of what was happening to her gradually became clear. She realized now that her survival was not an accident, but an obstacle for those who craved power and control. Her uncle, a cold and calculating man, had long been waiting for the moment to get rid of her once and for all, in order to freely seize the family's wealth. This inheritance, vast lands, cattle, money, was not just property, but a symbol of power in these harsh lands. And everyone who knew the truth understood that Cassidy was the last obstacle on the way to this power. Her death would have been beneficial to many, and the hunt for her did not cease for a moment. Hidden threats came not only from open enemies, but also from those who hid in the shadows, knowing how to disguise themselves as friends and allies. Every step was dangerous, every glance a potential trap, and now she understood that she would have to fight not only for her life, but also for the right to exist as an heiress. In this dead city, where the past mixed with the present, secrets and deception intertwined in an endless web of intrigue. Cassidy was ready to go all the way, despite threats and betrayals, because her fate, and the fate of those who depended on her, hung by a thin thread. With the appearance of the woman with the gun, a new thin thread of tension appeared between Cassidy and her companion, a thread that could either bind them tighter or break them forever. Her knowledge of the girl's past was indisputable, and now trust was weighing on the decision they had to make. Cassidy knew that the past would not let her go easily. It would haunt her, lurk in every step, in every breath. A struggle was raging in her soul, the desire to believe that they would find a way out, and the fear that trust would turn into betrayal. She felt the past gliding by like a shadow, whispering about the inevitable. But now is not the time to retreat. It was necessary to decide whether to accept help, to allow a new acquaintance to become part of the path, or to leave her alone so as not to endanger those around her. This decision was a turning point, the moment when the darkness of the past and the uncertain future met on the verge of her choice, a choice that will determine not only the fate of Cassidy, but also those who are close to her, those who have not yet had time to reveal their cards. Somewhere behind him, like a relentless wind, there were shadows, shadows of the past that would not let Cassidy go a step. Her uncle's men, driven by a thirst for power and the bitterness of defeat, followed their trail with a cold determination that cut through space like a knife blade. These hunters weren't just pursuers, they were the epitome of the dark side of the world Cassidy had once lived in and was now fighting for. Every step they took was an echo of a heavy promise, to get the last obstacle out of the way. The daughter of the rancher, who seemed to have escaped from the hands of death, contrary to all predictions. Their faces were hidden behind dusty hats, and their eyes sparkled with malice and unyielding will. They knew that stopping Cassidy meant taking control of everything that was her legacy and destroying everything she was trying to preserve. The wind lifted the dust, and it curled in the air. like a curse that permeated this hunt. Behind every rock, behind every bush, there could be enemies hiding, ready to stab you in the back without warning. Every gust of wind brought the smell of smoke, dust, and greed. The silence between them was tense, as if before a thunderstorm that was about to hit. Cassidy walked, supported by his strong arm, feeling fatigue corroding her body, but fear, sharper than ever. Memories flashed through her mind, ignited by the shadows of the hunters. Betrayal, carnage, loss. It was not just a persecution. It was a struggle for life and freedom, where every moment could be the last. He, her silent protector, felt the weight of the past on him. His scars throbbed with pain, but there was a quiet fire of determination in his eyes. The wind tore dry branches from the ground, and these sounds, creaking, cracking, seemed to echo the battles that still had to be fought. His silence was not an emptiness, but a deep concentration on keeping her safe no matter what. The sun was rising over the horizon, scorching and merciless, like the fate that brought them together. Their path was like a dusty path lost among rocks and relentless winds. But there was hope in every step. The hope that one day it will be possible to leave the fear behind, when it will be possible to see the light again. In the meantime, there were only the shadows of the hunters, their ruthless footsteps and heavy breathing, which were getting closer and closer as the inevitable approaches. And in this inevitability, there is struggle, blood, and the very tenuous bond that unites two lost souls on the edge of the desert. At the same moment when the first heavy footsteps and distant voices were heard behind them, he felt the silence being torn apart. His hands, accustomed to silence, took a familiar weapon in their usual grip, a revolver, cold and heavy, like the weight of his entire fate. In this silence, he became not just a man without a name, but the embodiment of an unyielding will, a silent defender who was willing to pay any price to ensure that her life remained inviolate. Every shot sounded like a response to the ruthless world around them. They weren't just gunshots. They were an act of desperation, an attempt to snatch her from the grip of death, a battle for freedom that seemed barely attainable. The explosions of bullets tore through the tranquility of the desert, scattering dust and cracks in the ground, as if the earth itself was responding to a challenge. He didn't say a word. His eyes were focused, and his movements were precise and uncompromising. Each pull of the trigger is a step towards salvation, but also another wound on his soul, which he hid deep inside. His past, dark and nameless, was now tightly intertwined with her fate, and he knew he couldn't back down. Through the dust and turmoil, he could feel her weakness becoming his strength. He was protecting not just a man, but hope, a tiny flame that warmed them both in the cold of a cruel world. His silence became louder than any words, and every action was a confirmation of his unbroken determination. They moved together, she supported by his strong arm, and he standing between her and danger like a human shield. Bullets rained down around him like a rain of metal, but he remained motionless, focused like a rock in a raging sea. And in this chaos, full of pain and fear, their story was born. A story of struggle, trust, and love that grew out of the ashes of betrayal and death. His silence became the language of their new world, where words were unnecessary, because every arrow, every step spoke for both of them. There was the same note of desperation in their every movement, every breath. It ran through my veins like hot lava, leaving traces of pain and fear that were hard to hide. But this despair was not just a feeling of doom. There was a spark behind him, deeply hidden, elusive but genuine. She said that there was something much stronger between them than just a struggle for life. Their gazes, though shackled by fear and fatigue, were suddenly filled with a secret power, like a quiet promise that needs no words. It was a bond woven from wounds, worries, and hopes, like invisible threads connecting two lonely hearts. In this silence, in the absence of loud words, something important and real grew. They were like two opposites meeting in the chaos of a world where every day could be the last. She is vulnerable but resilient. He is silent but ruthless in his defense. Together they formed a whole, balancing on the edge between life and death, fear and trust. Every step they took on this dusty path was not just an attempt to escape, it was a struggle for the right to be together. Their hearts beat in unison with the heavy breathing of the wind, carrying dust and the smell of distant dreams. An invisible magic sprang up between them, the breath of a new beginning, born amidst the flames of danger. And even when the ground beneath their feet was shaking from the footsteps of the pursuers, fearlessness shone in their eyes, a sign that not only fear flows in their blood, but also love, which becomes the only anchor in the storm of fate. A faint silhouette flickered on the distant horizon, a ghostly image of the city, like a fragment of a dream that beckoned them forward. For them, this city was not just a cluster of dilapidated houses and dusty streets. It was a symbol of hope, an opportunity to escape from persecution, a chance to start anew, to leave blood and fear behind. Every step across the rough ground was both a test and an approach to a new life. The dust beneath their feet seemed ominous, as if the earth itself was unwilling to let go of those who were so desperately trying to escape its clutches. The air was heavy with suspense. There could be danger ahead, but also the promise of salvation. The city beckoned, its contours gradually gaining clarity, as if in answer to a silent prayer uttered in the soul of each of them. There, among the ruins and shadows, there was an opportunity to find not only shelter, but also a new destiny. Although the path was strewn with drops of sweat and blood, they knew that there could be a trap hiding behind every turn, that a threat could slip behind every whisper of the wind. But the desire to survive, the desire to preserve each other, moved them forward with inexorable force. There was a fire of determination in their gazes. Despite their fatigue and fear, they could not give up hope, which now burned inside like a small but unquenchable bonfire. This city is the last chance, the last frontier where everything can start anew. And in that moment, when the horizon seemed so close and so far away at the same time, they continued walking, driven by a force stronger than fear, the power of love and faith in a future where blood and despair would give way to peace and freedom. They came to a city that seemed to be nothing more than a shadow of its former greatness. Dusty streets, leaning buildings, and the faces of passers-by stained with distrust and cold. There was tension in the air, as if the earth itself had a premonition of an imminent judgment. But this trial they were about to face was nothing more than a farce, staged for the sake of other people's interests. There was no truth here, only whispers, suspicions, and the heavy shadow of the past that refused to let its captives go. The fine line between law and injustice has melted away, leaving room only for the play of power and fear. As soon as they were in front of the court, the words about the girl swept through the courtroom like a red-hot wind. Her name, Cassidy, flashed in the memory of those present, like an old wound opened over and over again. Details of her past have surfaced. The daughter of a wealthy rancher, a survivor of a massacre, the last living key to the inheritance that many so longed for. Accusations seethed from the mouths of judges and witnesses, forming an invisible trap around her. The trial seemed to be a foregone conclusion, and the atmosphere was saturated with hostility, ready to tear her apart. The courtroom turned into a theater where justice was just a mask for darker games. Decisions were made not based on facts, but under pressure from those who held the threads of power in this city. The laws seemed to be written for profit and control, not for the sake of truth and the protection of the innocent. Every gesture of the judges, every word of the accusers, was rehearsed in advance, like a scene where Cassidy was doomed to play the role of a victim in someone else's game. In this grim performance, justice gave way to ruthless greed, turning her struggle for life into a struggle against a system that did not want her to be free. He stood up like a shadow that didn't expect attention, and silently took on the brunt of the accusations. Without a name, without a past, he became a shield, a barrier between her and the cruel world that was ready to break her. This act is more than just a confession. It is a cry of the soul, a sacrificial act in which love and determination are intertwined to protect with at least one act the fragile light of hope that still smoldered between them. His silence now spoke louder than words. His namelessness became a symbol of sacrifice for the sake of the future he wanted to give her, even if the price was his own freedom. The shackles clanked heavily. The cold metal bit into Nameless's wrists, chaining him to his new captive fate. His freedom had been taken away without mercy in exchange for the chance he'd given her. His footsteps echoed through the stone streets as he was led away, leaving Cassidy on the threshold of a new life, but with a weight of loss that weighed heavily on his heart. In this moment, the bitterness of loss and a glimmer of hope were mixed, the price that had to be paid for the opportunity to get out of the darkness and face the dawn. Cassidy stood at the crossroads of her fate, her heart torn between gratitude and pain. She felt the weight of his sacrifice, but at the same time a spark of hope smoldered in her chest. Hope for the freedom he had given her at the cost of his own fate. The internal conflict raged like a desert storm. Accept the loss and move forward, or look for a way to regain what was lost. Her gaze darted between the road leading into the unknown and the shadow of the departing protector, whose silent feet had changed their lives forever. It was a moment when the past collided with the future, and only her choice depended on which way the story would go next. She stood at a crossroads where every road was fraught with unknown danger, but mentally she could not retreat. Affection flared up in her heart, quiet but indomitable, like a flame that smoldered even in the dead of night. This man with no name, no past, who had become her silent protector so many times, suddenly became the meaning of her struggle. Letting him go meant betraying not only him, but also herself. There was also the weight of duty in these feelings, not just for the life they had saved, but for the spark of trust that had suddenly ignited between them in the midst of a cruel world. Cassidy understood that the price of this connection would be high, and every attempt she made to fight for freedom now involved danger hanging over both of them. But the heart, like the flame, did not want to go out. The wind through the narrow streets of the city seemed colder than before, as if it told them that time was not on their side. Her thoughts ran through memories, images, to those rare moments when he looked at her not just as a burden or an obligation, but as a person worth fighting for. In this tacit agreement, hope was hidden, albeit fragile, but living. She knew that simply leaving him in the hands of his enemies was not her way. Even if a storm of intrigue and lies was unfolding around her, in this city where justice was only a shadow of itself, Cassidy found the determination to go all the way. It was not just for the sake of saving a person, but in order to preserve a piece of his soul, not to lose it in a series of betrayals. And in this quiet but relentless fire of the desire to fight for him and for themselves, a new plan was born, bold, risky, but the only one that could give them a chance at freedom. There was no longer any place for fear in the girl's heart, only burning determination and willingness to pay any price. The weight of the choice forced Cassidy to turn to something that once seemed long forgotten, to old connections and those who did not betray her in moments of despair. Amidst the dust and darkness of the city, in the corners where the whispers of the past still lived, she searched for those who were willing to defy danger for her. These people were connected to her not just by memories. They knew what the massacre had turned out to be, which had separated her from her previous life and almost deprived her of hope. Every meeting with them cost her a lot of strength, not only physical fatigue, but also mental pain. The looks of disbelief, the caution in her movements, and the words spoken between the lines all reminded her of the fine line on which relationships rest in a world where loyalty is a rare gift. But Cassidy couldn't afford to be weak, because a plan to save a man who had become more than just an ally depended on these connections. Her heart sank when she remembered how much she had to lose and go through to get back on her feet. Nevertheless, she was ready to open her soul to those who had long known her true strength and fears, who remembered her not only as the daughter of an influential rancher, but also as a woman who could withstand death. The trust in this relationship was fragile, like thin ice underfoot, and Cassidy paid for it with her own pain, memories that burst out like shadows of the past, and sometimes it seemed that they would consume her. But it was this pain that gave her strength. It became a symbol of her determination and perseverance. There was more to their help than just a tactical advantage. It was an unspoken solidarity, a confirmation that even in a cruel world, you can find those who are willing to take risks for the sake of another. These old connections, though tested, became a beacon in the dark for Cassidy, guiding her to the only thought: to save him at all costs. In the silence of the abandoned rooms and at the intersections of the dark streets, Cassidy and her old allies developed a plan, bold, daring, and ruthlessly risky. Every move, every little detail was discussed with cold precision, because the stake was not just high, it was decisive. The life of the man who had already become more than just a protector for her was hanging by a thread, and time was ruthlessly slipping through her fingers. Putting together everything they knew about the prison and the guards, they calculated the options, identified weaknesses, and worked out ways to get into the very heart of the prison. The difficulty of the plan was not only to bypass the guards, but also to do it unnoticeably, without causing unnecessary noise that could provoke immediate reprisals. Cassidy could feel the cold excitement seizing her thoughts, the sharp tension forcing her muscles to be ready for action at any moment. Her body seemed to be filled with new strength, willpower, determination, and a fire of struggle that could not be extinguished. Every step of the plan was imbued with what was behind it: an opportunity to regain freedom, a chance for a new life. The realization that there was little time left forced them to speed up their preparations, but caution did not give up. Even the slightest mistake could lead to death. The plan included surprises and traps for enemies, disguise and fast movement, the ability to hide in the shadows and leave no trace. In these subtleties lay the hope that Cassidy held in her heart like the most precious gift. The feeling grew inside her that this was not just salvation. This was the last chance to prove that it was possible to defeat darkness not with weapons, but with courage and love. At that moment, she was ready to do anything to come on the night of the execution, not with a plea, but with a gun in her hands. Night fell like a heavy blanket over the city, hiding the silhouettes of houses and shadows scattered across the streets. The air was thick and tense, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable reckoning. At this very hour, when the silent defender was supposed to be brought to the place of execution, she quietly, almost imperceptibly, made her way through the dark alleys, clutching a gun tightly in her hands. Her eyes were burning with determination, burning with a fire that had not been extinguished for a long time. Every step echoed in the silence, every sound seemed deafening, but she walked forward, driven not by fear, but by a desire to change fate. The night was her ally, hiding under its shadows the determination of a woman who was ready to do anything to save someone who had become her mainstay in this ruthless world. Everything that had been accumulated during the days of struggle and waiting was now concentrated in one moment, the moment when courage would surpass fear. Lights flashed around the corner, the reflections of torches carrying punishing justice, and the footsteps of guards approaching the place of execution. She knew that there were only a few minutes left, and every moment was worth its weight in gold. Anxiety was beating in her heart, mixed with hope, the hope that this last, desperate act would change everything. As she approached the spot, she noticed the Nameless One, shackled, with a tired but steady gaze that immediately detected her presence. There was gratitude and understanding in his eyes that salvation was near, that the struggle was not over yet. Without saying a word, she raised her gun, ready to fight fate, ready to challenge all those who wanted them to fall. The night was their veil, the weapon was their voice, and determination was the only way to freedom. At that moment, everything depended on the moment, on the shot, on luck and courage. There is a struggle ahead, the outcome of which will determine the fate of not only the two of them, but of everything that was built on hope and love. The night was gathering around them like a thick blanket in which they were forced to hide. Their feet were running, stomping on the rough ground. Their hearts were pounding so loudly that it seemed to be heard far around. Gunshots exploded like thunder behind them, and the whistling of bullets rang alarmingly in the air, threatening to close the distance between them and their pursuers. Every move was filled with fear and determination. Step by step, they were fighting not just for escape, but for life, as if fate itself was playing a cruel game with them. In this darkness and chaos, there is no room for weakness, only speed and firmness of will. Their breath mingled with the noise of the night, and the world around them shrank to a narrow corridor leading to salvation, which was so close and at the same time so far away. He could barely stand on his feet. The wound burned deeply. Every drop of blood caused a dull pain, clouding his mind. The muscles seemed to refuse to obey, and the strength slowly left the body as if flowing through the fingers. But she was strong and stubborn, and she wouldn't let him fall. Gritting her teeth and suppressing her fear, she supported him like an unbreakable rock in the middle of a storm. Her arms wrapped tightly around him, forcing him to walk on, step by step, despite the pain and fatigue. Her determination burned brighter than any fire, making her heart beat faster, inspiring her not to give up, even when it seemed that she had no strength at all. Together they moved forward, connected not only by a common destiny, but also by the strength of the spirit, which did not allow them to break down. When the first gentle rays of dawn began to dispel the darkness of the night, the world around seemed to come to life anew. The soft sounds of awakening nature filled the air, the chirping of birds, the rustle of the wind in the treetops, the barely noticeable murmur of a stream. In this new world, their path seemed less harsh, and their hearts were filled with a faint but confident hope. In the distance, at the edge of the clearing, their house appeared, modest, clumsy, and simple, but at that moment it became a symbol of salvation for them. Not a palace or a fortress, but a house, a place where you can relax, heal wounds, and find peace. The shadows of the night gradually receded, giving way to the clarity and silence of the morning, and with them went the fears and worries. Here, in the midst of nature and comfort, a new chapter of their lives began, not an easy one, but a real one. Behind the wooden door of the modest house, they were greeted by peace, so rare and precious after endless worries and dangers. The air here was saturated with the warmth of the hearth, the soft light of dawn coming through the dusty windows, and the quiet whisper of hope. Despite the difficult past and the shadows that could always overtake them from the outside, time seemed to slow down inside this shelter. There was no need to hide or pretend here. They could just be themselves, without masks and fears. This place became the beginning of a new life, an opportunity to heal wounds and build something real, relying not on fear, but on trust. In this house, in the silence and comfort, something more was emerging. The feeling that there could be days ahead without threats, without harassment and cruelty. Here, among the modest walls and quiet warmth, they could start living anew. In the gentle light of dawn, when the first rays of the sun gently caressed the room, he did something he had not dared to do before. He said his name. It was a simple and resonant word, but for her it became a revelation, a symbol of trust that was slowly but surely breaking through the wall of silence and secrecy. This moment wasn't loud or pretentious. On the contrary, it was quiet, almost intimate, as if an invisible thread connected their souls, creating something new and real. His name became a sign that he was no longer just a silent protector from the past, but a man who was ready to open his heart, trust himself, and accept her by his side. In this morning light, a new chapter was beginning, a chapter filled with hope, intimacy, and the opportunity to be together despite all the obstacles that stood in front of them. With the first glimmer of a new dawn, the world seemed to come to life anew, enveloping everything around with a gentle light of hope. This dawn was not just the beginning of a new day, it became a symbol of rebirth, a harbinger of the changes that would inevitably come in their lives. In his warm rays, there were promises of new love, mutual support, and the opportunity to build a future together, despite the shadows of the past and the inevitable trials that still lie ahead. At that moment, they were together, two souls who had found support and strength in each other. There was a determination in their eyes to move forward, accept the challenges of fate, and fight for every moment of freedom and happiness. The wind, playing gently with the curtains, seemed to whisper that everything was just beginning, and let the path be thorny, but now they are not alone. So the new dawn brought with it a light but persistent sense of change, the beginning of a new chapter, where love and faith in the best intertwined with the shadow of impending trials. And in this delicate balance between light and darkness, a story was born that they would write together. Thanks for watching. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support is very important to us. See you soon. There are still many amazing stories ahead.